There's a fly on my lens. Get off, you. Get off. My name is Andy Hornby, photographer and vlogger. 17 years ago I started teaching myself photography. Today I travel the UK as a professional wedding photographer, landscape photographer and filmmaker. Learn from my experiences, my mistakes and my tips and advice.
It won't go away. I've got that feeling rushing through my body. I know that it is here to stay. It's like you're my personal illuminati.
Welcome to another video. These steps you might remember from my intro that I have on my channel. I love coming down here. You've got the Garrison Church behind me, spinning a tower over the back there, and this old Portsmouth sort of area from here down towards the point down there. It's actually a really nice place to come and take lots of pictures, so I'm down here all the time. I do a lot of my workshops down here as well, and if you're interested in workshops, have a look at the link to my website in the description. Anyway, back to this video. This video is a sort of continuation to my other recent videos. Actually, I probably should have done this one before I'd done my last one. I was asked the other day if I've ever made any mistakes with my landscape photography, and the answer is yeah, of course. Of course I make lots of mistakes. I made most of them when I was beginning, when I was starting my landscape photography journey, if you like, and that's what this video is going to be about. It's going to be about the mistakes that I made back then, hopefully giving you a bit of advice on where potentially, if you're a beginner, you might sort of hit those same mistakes, and offer you advice to get around them and not make them, hopefully. And the first one is quite a big one. It's to do with composition and telling a story. I've always said this, and I say it to literally everyone I come across, that landscape photography is one of the hardest genres of photography to do, and I don't want to belittle anyone who does other types of photography. I'm an eclectic photographer myself. I do a lot of commercial stuff, I do portraits, weddings, but the difference with that kind of photography is that you always have a subject. There's always something to take a picture of. So if I'm taking a picture of a portrait, there's a model. If I'm doing a wedding, obviously I've got all the wedding stuff and other bits and pieces going on. There's always something to take a picture of, so you kind of know what that story is going to be. With landscape photography, often or not, there is no story. There's no thing to take a picture of. You're going out and taking a picture of a landscape. It could be a barren landscape, it could be a seascape with nothing in it, it could be a desert with very little interest in it. And that's the problem with landscape photography, and what people don't understand is that it's very difficult to tell a story, and that's the essence of any kind of photography, and it's why landscape photography is one of the hardest genres to master, if you like. So your mission as a landscape photographer is to let your viewers know what it is you're taking a picture of. You've got to translate that 3D world around you onto a 2D sensor, and it's often really, really difficult, especially with sort of wide angle lenses where everything sort of seems a lot further away. So you have to think about your composition. And in the early days of my landscape photography, I just went out there, started snapshot and everything. I came home with hundreds and thousands of images that I've never used, because when I get them back to the computer and I have a look at them, I don't like them, and I don't want to tell people a story, or I don't want to show people images that I've taken where it doesn't tell a story and it doesn't make sense even to me. So that's one of the biggest mistakes I made as a beginner landscape photographer, is going out. And I'll bring you back to and I'll give you an idea of almost like one of my first major sort of treks out. I went to the Isle of Wight, which you can't see is just over the back there, for a day out. It was a day trip to the Isle of Wight to do lots of photography, get lots of pictures, and I came home with hundreds, if not thousands, of images. I started at one end of the island of Bembridge, ended up at the lighthouse point. I can't remember what you call it now, and I got some really nice images, and I was really pleased with a lot of them. But I had thousands of other images that I didn't ever use, and that's kind of how my photography was in those days. It was taking pictures of everything and going out there and just randomly taking shots of stuff. Nowadays, as you probably gather from a lot of my recent videos, it's all about planning, and I go out there specifically for specific composition. I generally know what I'm going to go and take a picture of because I've researched it and then research it some more, and then use a lot of apps to plan my actual trip itself. So that doesn't happen anymore, and that's probably one of the main things I would say as a beginner landscape photographer to get your head around, is planning. Know what you're going to take a picture of, know what story you want to tell from that picture, and go and get that picture, and then mess around and do all the other bits and pieces and get snapshots. Otherwise you will always be a snapshot photographer. You'll never be a true landscape photographer unless you actually tell a story. Go out there, find a subject, and actually tell your readers or whoever it is going to see your pictures your story. There's no point in doing it otherwise. You will always be a snapshot photographer, and you don't want to be that. You want to be a landscape photographer. So plan. My last couple of videos have been sort of mulling around this similar sort of topic, so maybe worth having a look at those videos.
I got my hands on your body, so tell me what you want me to do.
Get out of the wind.
I can be good or be naughty, because there ain't nobody love you like I do.
Oh. Hope that's got you out of the wind a little bit there. Okay. Oh. The second sort of mistake I made when I was a beginner landscape photographer, and probably one of the biggest mistakes I ever learned from as such, was not using my meter on my camera, and as a result never really understood that I had to expose for my highlights. Now I've done a video on this recently, have a look back a couple of videos about exposing for the highlights in photography, and this probably for most genres of photography, you have to expose for the highlights, because if you don't and you blow the highlights out, if the dynamic range on the camera isn't good enough, you're going to lose the detail in all the highlights, and you can't get that back. The way I explain it to people is, if you underexpose slightly and you sort of darken the dark areas of image too much, it doesn't really matter, because in nature, when you're looking around and you look at dark areas, you lose detail anyway, and it doesn't matter if you lose detail in the dark areas as much as it does if you lose detail in the light areas, because you can always up the exposure slightly in Lightroom, and if your dynamic range is okay, you're going to get some of that detail back. But like I say, it doesn't matter so much. So use your meter on the back of your camera. You'll see it. It's the little bar that you tend to see on my camera. It just tells me whether I'm underexposed or overexposed by a certain amount of stops. But you have a little meter. I'll try and put something up over the top of this so you can see what I mean. Use that as best you can. I tend to, like I said, I tend to underexpose ever so slightly, and I do that for a pretty good reason. Again, if you blow the highlights out, you can't get that detail back. It is just that simple. Whew. Let's get down off of this high bit. Oh. Okay, maybe I'll do this bit walking. What do you reckon? I know you hate it, but I'm going to do it. This is happening. So the third one, and another quite important one, is the time of day that you shoot. I see a lot of photographers going out in the midday sun, and as a beginner that's okay, but if you want to become a proper landscape photographer, you need to think about the time of day that you're shooting. Again, it's another thing I've talked about before, but I made this mistake. Going out during the day in really harsh sunlight, we're lighting our subject from a light that's directly above, and you get the harsh shadows, and it's not good. It really is not good. So if you think about it, you really want to get out there sunrise, sunset, the golden hour. And we spoke about this before, and it's the golden hour for a number of reasons, mainly because the light coming off the sun as it's hitting through the atmosphere, because we pollute the sky so much, turns slightly yellow. There's a caveat to that, because there's another time that's really, really good, and that's blue hour. This is the time of day that people forget about. I've spoken about it time and time again. I'm going to do a video on it. I've already got some plans in place. So blue hour is the time of the day when before the sun rises and after the sun sets over in the corner there. Blue hour kind of starts over the opposite side of the sky if it's setting, and it sort of concertinas across as the sun goes down further and further and further. There's a part of the day where the exposure in the sky kind of comes down and meets the exposure of your foreground, and makes it really easy to take pictures without having to use filters, like graduated filters that can be a nightmare. I don't use them myself, not getting onto that. blue hour and golden hour are a fantastic time of the day to shoot landscape photography. Just makes sense that if you're going to become a landscape photographer, use that. Don't go out during the day. Don't shoot lots of things during the day when the sun's really harsh. But if you do, go out on a cloudy day. Let's talk about diffusing the sun. Diffusing our main light like we do with any other types of photography. We diffuse our light. And if it's cloudy like it is today, and the sun's out, you don't get any shadows. You don't get harsh shadows. Another mistake that I used to make when I was a beginner landscape photographer was worry about the gear that I was using. And it's a big thing for a lot of people, because a lot of people think that you need really good kit to get landscape photography, and you don't. You really don't. The really expensive lenses that have got, you know, the massive apertures are useless. There's no point in having really expensive lenses, because you're probably never going to shoot a very wide aperture. You're probably going to want somewhere around f10, which is what I teach people, somewhere around f10, f11, so you get everything in focus. That means you don't need the really expensive 2.8 or 1.4 lenses to do landscapes. You can get some really cheap, decent lenses that are absolutely fantastic for landscapes, really cheap. But in the beginning, I was all worried about the kind of gear that I was using, looking at what other people were using and trying to match their stuff. It's just not worth it. So don't worry about the gear that you're using. Most cameras are relatively easy to use for landscape photography, and lenses aren't a big deal. Honestly, they're not. For landscapes, I tend to have a wide angle and potentially some not so wide angle lenses, but in the beginning I was pretty worried about it until I realised that you don't need that. Of course, I then started doing weddings, which meant I had to have the really expensive gear, so I now have really good lenses that potentially aren't necessarily needed for landscape.
I've got my hands on your body, so tell me what you want me to do. I can be good or be naughty, because there ain't nobody love you like I do, like I do, like I do, like I do.
Okay, and the last kind of mistake I used to make when I was beginning was to shoot everything at eye level. So I get somewhere, I'd either be handheld, take a picture, or I'd set my tripod down, I'll be at eye level and I'll be like this, take a picture from this level. And what I didn't realise was that that's kind of the level where everybody sees the things I'm taking a picture of. Does that make sense? So if I'm taking a picture of the pier behind me and I'll take a picture from this level, everybody sees it from that level naturally anyway. So I started thinking, well, what's the best thing I can do here is actually get to a different level. So go down. Most of my photography is done from very low down on a tripod, really low to the ground, for many reasons. Mainly because it's an angle where no one else is getting. It also means that my tripod's very sturdy, very rigid when it's really low to the ground and the legs are out quite far, especially when I'm on a beach or somewhere where potentially a bit of movement could ruin my long exposure photography. I do a lot of time lapses, so it means that my time lapses aren't jumping all over the place. It just means that I can get to a different perspective. I've got a guy who comes on some of my workshops who's got a sort of 7-foot tripod. It's up here. I said to him, it's awesome that you can shoot from quite high up, because it's a perspective that no one really sees. No one sees that, unless you're 7 foot, of course. He is quite tall, so it kind of makes sense. Try and get to a perspective that no one else really gets to see. So when you go somewhere, you know, get your camera out, get low to the ground, take pictures, you know, have a look around, and just take your time and get the picture that you want in your mind transferred to your camera. It's been a fairly quick video, and I want to put it out because it's a question I was asked very recently, you know, what kind of mistakes you make, or what kind of mistakes I made when I was first starting out as a landscape photographer. And there's been a few. I'm sure there's more than what I've covered in this video. Hopefully you can learn from my mistakes that I made, and potentially you can sort of, you know, leapfrog those mistakes and start creating art out of your landscape. So I want to thank you very much for watching this video. If you got anything out of it, please whack a thumbs up. If you have any comments or questions about this video, please leave them in the comments section down below. And if you haven't done so already, please subscribe. I've got a lot more videos coming out. Hopefully on a weekly basis you'll see a new video every week. Hit the notification bell so you get updates every time I upload those videos, and I hope you see you on another one. Take care. Bye.